Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The $12 Million Stuffed Shark, The Curious Economics of Contemporary Art, by Don Thompson. Narrated by Verner. The $12 Million Stuffed Shark. January 13th, 2005. New York. One problem for the agent trying to sell the stuffed shark was the $12 million asking price for this work of contemporary art. Another was that it weighed just over 2 tons and was not going to be easy to carry home. The taxidermy 15-foot tiger shark's sculpture was mounted in a giant glass vitrine and creatively named The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living. The shark had been caught in 1991 in Australia and prepared and mounted in England by technicians working under the direction of British artist Damien Hirst. Another concern was that while the shark was certainly a novel artistic concept, many in the art world were uncertain whether it qualified as art. The question was important because $12 million represented more money than had ever been paid for a work by a living artist, other than Jasper Johns. More than for a Gerhard Richter, a Robert Rauschenberg, or a Lucian Freud. Why would anyone even consider paying this much money for the shark? Part of the answer is that in the world of contemporary art, branding can substitute for critical judgment, and lots of branding was involved here. The seller was Charles Saatchi, an advertising magnate and famous art collector, who 14 years earlier had commissioned Hirst to produce the work for £50,000. At the time, the sum was considered so ridiculous that The Sun heralded the transaction with the headline, "$50,000 for fish without chips." Hirst intended the figure to be an outrageous price, said as much for the publicity it would attract as for the monetary return. The agent selling the shark was New York-based Larry Gagosian, the world's most famous art dealer. One buyer known to be actively pursuing the shark was Sir Nicholas Sirota, director of London's Tate Modern Museum, who had a very constrained budget to work with. 4 collectors with much greater financial means had shown moderate interest. The most promising was American Steve Cohen, a very rich Connecticut hedge fund executive. Hirst, Saatchi, Gagosian, Tate, Sirota, and Cohen represented more art world branding than is almost ever found in one place. Saatchi's ownership and display of the shark had become a symbol for newspaper writers of the shock art being produced by the group known as the Young British Artists, the YBAs. Put the branding and the publicity together, and the shark must be art, and the price must not be unreasonable. There was another concern, serious enough that with any other purchase it might have deterred buyers. The shark had deteriorated dramatically since it was first unveiled at Saatchi's private gallery in London in 1992. Because the techniques used to preserve it had been inadequate, the original had decomposed until its skin became heavily wrinkled and turned a pale green. A fin had fallen off, and the formaldehyde solution in the tank had turned murky. The intended illusion had been of a tiger shark, swimming toward the viewer through the white space of the gallery, hunting for dinner. The illusion now was described as entering Norman Bates' fruit cellar and finding Mother embalmed in her chair. Curators at the Saatchi Gallery tried adding bleach to the formaldehyde, but this only hastened the decay. In 1993, the curators gave up and had the shark skinned. The skin was then stretched over a weighted fiberglass mold. The shark was still greenish, still wrinkled. Damien Hirst had not actually caught the now decaying shark. Instead, he made shark-wanted telephone calls to post offices on the Australian coast, which put up posters giving his London number. He paid £6,000 for the shark, £4,000 to catch it, and £2,000 to pack it in ice and ship it to London. There was the question of whether Hirst could replace this rotting shark simply by purchasing and stuffing a new one. Many art historians would argue that if refurbished or replaced, the shark became a different artwork. If you overpainted a Renoir, it would not be the same work. But if the shark was a conceptual piece, would catching an equally fierce shark and replacing the original using the same name be acceptable? Dealer Larry Gagosian drew a weak analogy to American installation artist Dan Flavin, who works with fluorescent light tubes. If a tube on a Flavin sculpture burns out, you replace it. Charles Saatchi, when asked if refurbishing the shark would rob it of its meaning as art, responded, "Completely." So what is more important, the original artwork or the artist's intention? Nicholas Sirota offered Gagosian $2 million on behalf of Tate Modern, but it was turned down. Gagosian continued his sales calls. When alerted that Saatchi intended to sell soon, Cohen agreed to buy. Hearst, Saatchi, and Gagosian are profiled later in the book. But who is Steve Cohen? Who pays $12 million for a decaying shark? Cohen is an example of the financial sector buyer who drives the market in high-end contemporary art. He is the owner of SAC, Capital Advisors, LLC in Greenwich, Connecticut, and is considered a genius. He manages $11 billion in assets and is said to earn $500 million a year. He displays his trophy art in a 32,000-square-foot mansion in Greenwich, a 6,000-square-foot pied-à-terre in Manhattan, and a 19,000-square-foot bungalow in Delray Beach, Florida. In 2007, he purchased a 10-bedroom, 2-acre estate in East Hampton, New York. To put the $12 million price tag in context, it is necessary to understand how rich, really rich, is. Assume Mr. Cohen has a net worth of $4 billion, to go with an annual income of $500 million before tax. At a 10% rate of return, far less than he actually earns on the assets he manages, his total income is just over $16 million a week, or $90,000 an hour. The shark cost him 5 days' income. Some journalists later expressed doubt whether the selling price for a physical impossibility actually was $12 million. Several New York media reported that the only other firm offer aside from that made by Tate Modern came from Cohen, and the actual selling price was $8 million. New York Magazine reported $13 million. But the $12 million figure was the most widely cited. It produced extensive publicity, and the parties agreed not to discuss the amount. At any of these numbers, the sale greatly increased the value of the other Hearst work in the Saatchi collection. Cohen was not sure what to do with the shark. It remained stored in England. He said he might donate it to the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, in New York, which might have led to his being offered a position on the MoMA board. The art world heralded the purchase as a victory for MoMA over London's Tate Modern. London's Guardian newspaper bemoaned the sale to an American, saying, "The acquisition will confirm MoMA's dominance as the leading gallery of modern art in the world." I began the journey of discovery that became this book at the Royal Academy of Arts in London, where on October 5, 2006, along with 600 others, I attended a private preview of USA Today, an exhibition curated by the same Charles Saatchi. This was billed as an exhibition of art by 37 talented young American artists. Many were not in fact American-born, though they were working in New York, an illustration of how hard it is to label an artist. The Royal Academy is a major British public gallery. Founded in 1768, it promotes its exhibitions as comparable to those at the National Gallery, the two Tate Galleries, and leading museums outside the United Kingdom. The USA Today show was not a commercial art fair because nothing was listed as for sale. Nor was it a traditional museum show because one man, Charles Saatchi, owned all the work. He chose what was shown. The work would appreciate in value from being shown in such a prestigious public space, and all profit from future sales would accrue to Saatchi. Saatchi is neither a professional curator nor museum official. Over a 4-decade career, he has been both the most talked-about advertising executive of his generation, and later, the most talked-about art collector. He is wildly successful in reselling art he has collected at a profit, Damien Hirst's shark being but one example. There was criticism of Saatchi both for using the Royal Academy to advance the value of his own art, and because some considered the work decadent or pornographic. The artists present at the opening had no illusions about the nature of the event. One called the Royal Academy the temporary home of the Saatchi Gallery. Another said it was good to see his art on the wall because it might not be displayed again until it was offered at auction. Extensive promotion of the show produced huge press coverage. It was hyped pre-opening by every major newspaper in London, by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and a dozen other major U.S. papers. Billed as an exhibition of shocking work, the show included a battle scene involving rats and an image of a girl performing a sex act on a man. The theme of USA Today was billed as disillusionment with contemporary America. Critics and curators at the private opening had diverging opinions of the theme and the work. Some questioned whether the artists could properly be described as disillusioned or even talented. Norman Rosenthal, the Royal Academy's exhibition secretary, said the work introduces a sense of political edge and anger mixed with nostalgia. This is an exhibition for our times. Critic Brian Sewell said, "At least Sensation, Saatchi's previous exhibition, made me feel nauseous. This made me feel nothing." Ivor Abrahams, a sculptor who sits on the RA Exhibitions Committee, added, "It's schoolboy smut and a cynical ploy to get Saatchi even more noticed." Such is the range of opinion common to contemporary art. Saatchi's own contribution was, "Please be my guest at USA Today, and leave me a note if you think that anything there is truly more tasteless than so much we see around us every day." The next day, the show opened to the general public. Ticket holders shuffled through the galleries in near silence, emotions muted. The crowd looked as if it was queuing to sign the condolence book before Princess Diana's funeral. As is true with much contemporary art, no one seemed anxious to admit they neither understood nor liked what was being shown. At the end, people filed out, talking softly, absorbing the experience, neither pleased nor shocked. What kind of contemporary art did Charles Saatchi choose for the show? Jonathan Pilipchuk from Winnipeg, Canada, showed a miniature army camp containing black American GIs with amputated legs, some writhing, others dead. The title is, "Hopefully, I Will Live Through This with a Little Bit of Dignity." Beijing-born and Vancouver-raised Terence Koh's Crackhead is a death fantasy of 222 glass vitrines with distorted black heads in plaster, paint, and wax, for which Saatchi said he had paid $200,000. Koh also offered a neon rooster titled Big White Cock. French artist Jules de Balancourt's U.S. World Studies 2 is a map showing the United States upside down, with the Mississippi River dividing Democratic states on the left from Republican states on the right. The rest of the world in small scale is at the bottom of the map. An artist actually born in New York and improbably named Dash Snow offered a work called F the Police, which consists of a collage of 45 newspaper clippings discussing police misdeeds, over which the artist had sprayed semen, his own presumably. 25-year-old Snow already had achieved earlier notoriety in the New York art community for running a graffiti gang called Iraq, and for performance art called The Hamster's Nest, which involved naked girls and hundreds of shredded phone books. By consensus, the most offensive work was Pakistani artist Huma Baba's wire figure with a primitive tail, dressed in a black garbage bag with outstretched arms and positioned in what seemed to be the Islamic prayer position. Baba, 45, makes sculptures of found materials which are, she says, about the human condition. Her work at USA Today seemed at first glance to be half man, half rat. However, critic Valdemar Janostak said in the Sunday Times, London, "There's only one likely reading of this work, as a religious specimen in which evolution has gone into reverse, hence the tail." Judging art is supposed to have less to do with the content of a work, and more to do with an instinctive sense of what the artist has to say. Kirsten Ward, who is a physician and psychologist, says that art has the greatest impact when it makes the thinking part of the brain talk to the feeling part. Great work speaks clearly, while more trivial work does what critics call going dead. The experienced art collector will take a work home before buying it, to look at it several times a day. The question is whether a week or a month hence, after the novelty disappears, the message and painter's skill will still be apparent. Dealer prices for the work shown by Saatchi ranged from $30,000 to $600,000. For the 105 pieces, the total was about $7.8 million. Saatchi probably paid half that because he is a high-profile collector and because the work was to be shown in a prestigious museum. Display at the Royal Academy would likely double the original retail value of each work, in which case the paper profit to Saatchi from the show was about $11.7 million. Saatchi is thought to have contributed about £2 million to pay for mounting the show. So what was the significance of USA Today? Did the show reflect the reality of 21st century contemporary art, or just Charles Saatchi's preference for shock art? Did these works deserve to be shown in a major museum, in some cases only weeks after they were created? Jerry Saltz of The Village Voice offers a rule of thumb: 85% of new contemporary art is bad. Most of the art world agree with the percentage, but disagree on how any particular work should be ranked. As an economist and contemporary art collector, I have long been puzzled by what makes a particular work of art valuable, and by what alchemy it is seen as worth $12 million or $100 million, rather than, say, $250,000. Works sometimes sell for 100 times what seems a reasonable sum, but why? Dealers and auction house specialists do not claim to be able to identify or define what will become million-dollar contemporary art. They say publicly that prices are whatever someone will pay, and privately that art buying at the most expensive end is often a game played by the super-rich, with publicity and cultural distinction as the prize. That may be a good description of motivation, but it does not explain the process. What follows is my year-long journey of discovery through the workings of the contemporary art market in London and New York, spending time with dealers, auction houses, with former executives of each, and with artists and art collectors. During that year, record prices were achieved at auction for 131 contemporary artists. 4 paintings sold during a 6-month period for more than $100 million each. The book looks at the economics and psychology of art, dealers and auctions. It explores money, lust, and the self-aggrandizement of possession, all important elements of the world of contemporary art. Branding and insecurity. What is Christie's? A brand of painting. Answer by Jacoby, age 7, quoted in Judith Ben-Amoué, The Worth of Art. Modern art is merely the means by which we terrorize ourselves. Tracy Emin, artist. The first great insight from my art world meetings came from Howard Rutkowski, formerly a specialist at Sotheby's, now a director of Bonham's Auctioneers in London. Never underestimate how insecure buyers are about contemporary art, and how much they always need reassurance. This is a truth that everyone in the art trade seems to understand, but no one talks about. The insecurity does not mean art buyers lack ability. It simply means that for the wealthy, time is their scarcest resource. They are not willing to spend the time required to educate themselves to the point of overcoming insecurity. So, very often, the way the purchase decision for contemporary art is made is not just about art, but about minimizing that insecurity. The insecurity is understandable. It is a world where even the most basic concepts can be slippery. Whenever I discussed the idea of this book, one of the first questions was always, tell me what defines contemporary art. There are really 2 questions there. What is contemporary, and what is art? The first question is much simpler, but even that lacks general agreement. One of the best books in the field, Brandon Taylor's Contemporary Art, is subtitled Art Since 1970. That is also the definition used by Christie's, who place earlier work of the 1950s and 60s in a 20th century sale. Sotheby's defines as early contemporary art produced between 1945 and 1970, and post-1970 art as late contemporary. Old Masters is art of the 19th century and earlier. Modern art encompasses the 20th century up to 1970 and includes abstract expressionism and pop art. Impressionist art overlaps the 19th and 20th centuries and is auctioned as a separate category or as impressionist and modern. Another definition of contemporary art is art by artists who are still living, but that excludes many deceased artists whose work is sold as contemporary. Andy Warhol, Joseph Beuys, Martin Kippenberger, Roy Lichtenstein, Donald Judd, Yves Klein, Jean-Michel Basquiat. Yet another definition includes artists born after the Second World War, but that eliminates everyone above except Klippenberger and Basquiat. The easiest definition is that contemporary art is what is sold by major auction houses in contemporary art sales. Even this is tricky. Sotheby's calls its sales contemporary art, while Christie's uses the broader title post-war and contemporary art, without indicating which work is in each category. Christie's does this because its categorization depends on the work rather than the date. Gerhard Richter's more abstract work is contemporary, and his later photorealist pieces are modern and impressionist. This mirrors the idea that contemporary art is more cutting-edge than that produced by traditional artists. My working definition is that contemporary art is non-traditional and was created after 1970, or that a major auction house has offered it or a similar work by the same artist as contemporary. I only discuss two-dimensional works on canvas or paper and sculpture. I do not include video installations, performance art, film or photography, industrial art, clocks, fans, bus shelters, or the draping of buildings. If you can smell it or taste it, or it is still moving or breathing, it may be art, but it is not included here. Such works are excluded because I don't understand them, and because with the exception of the photography of Cindy Sherman and a couple of others, major auction houses do not sell them under the heading of contemporary art. Even saying that much contemporary art is two-dimensional work called painting is not straightforward. Painting should be easy to define. It is the product of paint-like materials being applied to a flat surface. But what about a painting produced as a video? Or a painting that is a collage, a cartoon, or graffiti? Cy Twombly has done a painting with a pencil. Andy Warhol has done paintings with urine. Robert Rauschenberg with dirt. And Chris Ofili with elephant dung. Ellsworth Kelly does paintings where the image is a color, and Damien Hirst pours paint onto a spinning wheel and produces spin paintings. Christopher Wool's letter paintings contain a word. In the case of one auctioned at Christie's, New York in November 2005 for $1.24 million. The 15 stenciled alkyd and enamel letters on aluminum spelled, "Run Dog, Run Dog, Run." Some of the stories in this book refer to a period of art earlier than contemporary, usually modern or impressionist. They are included as examples of economics and process with auction houses and dealers. The themes of contemporary art and design often overlap. Is a Louis Vuitton handbag a work of design or art? There are a great many connections. Francois Pinault, owner of luxury goods group PPR, which includes Gucci and Balenciaga, is also the owner of Christie's Auction House. Luxury goods firm LVMH has an art gallery in its flagship store on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. One of the first exhibits in the Espace Culturel Louis Vuitton involved large photographs of naked black and white women forming the LV of Louis Vuitton. Another exhibit was a video of women posing as handbags on the shelves of the shop. The idea was to use art to rejuvenate Vuitton designs and to relate the LV brand to art. Both the Victoria and Albert Museum in London and the Guggenheim Museum in New York have shown Vuitton handbags, the V&A as design, the Guggenheim as art. Contemporary art overlaps with everyday objects, particularly when the ability to draw or sculpt is replaced by conceptual art. In 2003, a 25-year-old student named Clinton Boisvert at the School of Visual Arts in New York was asked to produce a sculpture project showing how the emotion elicited by art could impact on life. Boisvert created 36 black boxes, each stenciled with the word fear. He had just finished hiding the last of these in New York City subway stations when he was arrested. A dozen stations were shut down for several hours, while police squads retrieved the sculptures. Boisvert was convicted of reckless endangerment, but received an A for the project. New York Times art critic Michael Kimmelman commented, "Art this bad should be a crime." When art schools and critics can't agree on the merit of a work, it is not surprising that collectors might lack confidence in their own judgment. Collectors' insecurities are reinforced by the way that contemporary art is described. Art professionals talk about Impressionist art in terms of boldness, depth, use of light, transparency, and color. They talk about contemporary art like Damien Hirst's Shark or Terence Coe's Crackhead in terms of innovation, investment value, and the artist being hot, meaning a relative unknown where word-of-mouth reports make them suddenly sought after. Since art collectors cannot always fathom the value code, they understandably do not trust their own judgment. Their recourse is often to rely on branding. Collectors patronize branded dealers, bid at branded auction houses, visit branded art fairs, and seek out branded artists. You are nobody in contemporary art until you have been branded. The concept of branding is usually thought of in relation to consumer products like Coke or Nike. Branding adds personality, distinctiveness, and value to a product or service. It also offers risk avoidance and trust. A Mercedes car offers the reassurance of prestige. Prada offers the reassurance of elegant contemporary fashion. Branded art operates the same way. Friends may go bug-eyed when you say, "I paid $5.6 million for that ceramic statue." No one is dismissive when you say, "I bought this at Sotheby's," or "I found this at Gagosian," or "This is my new Jeff Koons." Branding is the end result of the experiences a company creates with its customers and the media over a long period of time, and of the clever marketing and public relations that go into creating and reinforcing those experiences. Successful branding produces brand equity, the price premium you are willing to pay for a branded item over a similar generic product. Brand equity is obvious when you purchase Coca-Cola rather than a supermarket house brand cola. Brand equity also has a huge effect on art pricing. The high return made on successful brands exists in all creative industries. As this book was being researched, 2 of the highest-grossing movies were Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code and Mission Impossible 3. What those movies had in common were reviews that ridiculed both storylines and the actors Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise. A year earlier, Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ received "Don't Go" reviews, then went on to break box office records. The reason moviegoers ignored these reviews was the involvement in each movie of at least one brand name. Brown, Hanks, Da Vinci, Cruise, Mission Impossible, or Christ. All are brands that audiences respond to. In contemporary art, the greatest value-adding component comes from the branded auction houses, Christie's and Sotheby's. They connote status, quality, and celebrity bidders with impressive wealth. Their branded identities distinguish these auction houses and the art they sell from their competitors. What do you hope to acquire when you bid at a prestigious evening auction at Sotheby's? A bundle of things. A painting, of course, but hopefully also a new dimension to how people see you. As Robert Lacey described it in his book about Sotheby's, you are bidding for class, for a validation of your taste. The Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim, and the Tate are museum brands. These have very different status from museums in Portsmouth or Cincinnati. When MoMA displays an artist's work, it conveys a shared branding, adding to the work of the artist a luster that the art world calls provenance. The MoMA brand offers buyer reassurance. A work of art that was once shown at MoMA, or was part of the MoMA collection, commands a higher price because of its provenance. Contemporary art dealerships like Gagosian or J. Joplin's White Cube in London are respected brands, which differentiate their art and artists from hundreds of other galleries, as Da Vinci or Mission Impossible are differentiated from other movies. A few collectors such as Charles Saatchi and artists such as Damien Hirst, Jeff Koons, and Andy Warhol have also achieved the status of recognized and respected brands. The motivation that drives the consumer to bid at a branded auction house, or to purchase from a branded dealer, or to prefer art that has been certified by having a show at a branded museum, is the same motivation that drives the purchase of other luxury consumer goods. Women purchase a Louis Vuitton handbag for all the things it may say about them. The handbag is easily recognized by others, distinguished by its brown color, gold leather trim, and snowflake design. A woman uncertain as to whether her friends will recognize this symbolism can choose a bag with Louis Vuitton spelled out in block capital letters. Men buy an Audemars Piguet watch with its 4 inset dials and lizard skin band even though their friends may not recognize the brand name and will not ask. But experience and intuition tells them it is an expensive brand, and they see the wearer as a person of wealth.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?